element 118, Oganesson, exists for less than a millisecond before undergoing radioactive decay. Yet in Joe Bandel's esoteric framework, the oak matrix, specifically Anchor 3, it serves as the ultimate stabilizing womb for universal consciousness. It is a staggering paradox to take the most fleeting physical substance ever synthesized by humans and position it as the eternal anchor for what Bandel calls the awareness loop. We are examining how Bandel merges particle physics with metaphysical architecture, claiming that outward light and inward electricity form a circuit of consciousness connected by magnetic flux lines.
The framework Bandel constructs in his work, The Oak Matrix, Dance of Opposites, is an ambitious attempt to build a unified field theory that bridges hard science and esoteric tradition. He is looking at the fundamental forces of the universe and reinterpreting them as mechanics of the soul. When he outlines Anchor 3, he posits that all existence is motion, defined by a reciprocal circuit. You have light, which is expansive and outward moving, paired with electricity, which acts as a containment field. Together, these forces create a self-sustaining loop of awareness.
That concept of a loop makes sense when we look at basic electromagnetism. An electric current generates a magnetic field, and a changing magnetic field induces an electric current. Bandel seems to be taking Faraday's law of induction and applying it to human cognition. But he pushes the analogy much further by introducing what he calls astral cords, which he defines as literal magnetic flux lines connecting everything from individual atoms to entire planets and even auras and souls.
He scales the physics from the microscopic to the cosmic. In conventional physics, magnetic flux lines are invisible pathways that map the magnetic field of an object, like the protective magnetosphere that surrounds the Earth. Bandel appropriates this concept to explain how consciousness travels. In his model, the photon, or the spark of awareness, uses these magnetic pathways to navigate through time and space. The astral cords are the infrastructure of the universe. If you think about the vast empty distances between planets, or the equally vast empty spaces between the nucleus of an atom and its electrons, Bandel is suggesting those spaces are not empty at all. They are threaded with these magnetic flux pathways.
This brings us to his concept of resonance. Bandel claims resonance occurs when archetypal points, which he identifies as the first 2 electrons per ring, link all layers of the system. This sounds like an esoteric reading of atomic orbital theory. In quantum mechanics, the innermost electron shell, the s orbital, holds a maximum of 2 electrons. Is he suggesting that this fundamental pairing is the key to unlocking movement across the entire atomic structure?
That is the exact translation of his model. By isolating those first 2 electrons in any given ring, he treats them as anchor points. In chemistry, a full valent shell dictates stability. Bandel argues that when these archetypal points integrate, awareness ceases to be confined to a single layer. It can travel across the electron rings without resistance. It is a metaphorical description of achieving a higher state of consciousness mapped onto the behavior of subatomic particles. When the system is fully integrated, the barriers between the physical layers dissolve, allowing the awareness spark to move unobstructed.
The architectural climax of this model is what he terms the Oganesson womb. I find this choice of element fascinating and deeply contradictory. Oganesson is a synthetic chemical element, with the atomic number 118. According to the historical record, it was first synthesized in 2002 by a joint team of Russian and American scientists at the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research in Dubna, Russia. It was formally named in 2016 to honor the nuclear physicist Yuri Oganesson. Bandel claims this Oganesson womb contains the full circuit and stabilizes the entire system. Yet actual empirical data on Oganesson shows it is highly radioactive. The few atoms ever produced survived for a mere 0.89 millisecond.
Why construct a metaphysical foundation on an element that cannot sustain its own physical form for even a second?
The answer lies in its position on the periodic table rather than its physical longevity. Oganesson is the heaviest element currently recognized. It sits at the very end of period 7 in group 18, which is the noble gases. Noble gases like helium, neon, and xenon are characterized by having a complete valence shell. They possess 8 electrons in their outermost layer, rendering them chemically inert and stable. In a symbolic sense, Oganesson represents the absolute completion of the periodic table as we know it. It contains 118 protons and 118 electrons. For Bandel, it is the ultimate container. It holds the maximum possible complexity of matter within a closed, complete system. The brief half-life does not matter in his framework. What matters is the architectural perfection of a completed 7th period.
But theoretical physics presents a complication that might actually validate Bandel's claim about awareness traveling freely. A study published in the journal Physical Review Letters in 2018 examined Oganesson using Einstein's special theory of relativity. Classical physics models predicted that Oganesson's electrons would arrange themselves in distinct, orderly shells, just like the lighter noble gases. However, when researchers factored in the extreme speeds that electrons must orbit a nucleus that massive, the relativistic effects distorted the structure. The electrons do not stay in distinct rings. They blur into an indistinct, nebulous blob. The rigid boundaries between the electron shells break down.
That relativistic blurring aligns with Bandel's assertion that in the integrated state, awareness travels freely across rings. If the physical boundaries of the electron shells dissolve due to the sheer mass and velocity within the Oganesson atom, it mirrors his metaphysical claim. The archetypal points link the layers, and the structure becomes permeable. The Oganesson atom, viewed through the lens of relativistic quantum chemistry, is not a rigid hierarchy of rings. It is a unified, continuous field of electron density. Bandel calls it a womb because it is a space where the individual boundaries of the lower elements melt away, creating a unified circuit of outward light and inward containment.
There is a persistent trend in metaphysical literature where authors appropriate the terminology of quantum mechanics to validate spiritual concepts. Critics often argue this strips the science of its rigorous mathematical context. When Bandel states that astral cords are magnetic flux lines connecting souls to planets, he is demanding that the reader accept a massive ontological leap. Earth possesses a measured magnetic field driven by convection currents in its molten iron core. A soul is an unquantifiable concept. Merging the two risks muddying the science while offering only a veneer of empirical credibility to the philosophy.
The criticism is valid, and scientists routinely push back against the popularization of quantum mysticism for that exact reason. Terms like resonance, frequency, and flex are often decoupled from their measurable realities. However, from a mythological and philosophical standpoint, Humans have always mapped the macrocosm onto the microcosm. Ancient Hermetic traditions taught the principle of as above, so below. Bandel is updating that ancient philosophical framework with modern vocabulary. He is not presenting the Oak Matrix as a literal physics textbook to be peer-reviewed by the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research. He is constructing an allegory for psychological and spiritual evolution. The atom becomes a mandala. The motion of light and electricity becomes a meditation on balancing our own expansive desires with our need for internal boundaries.
The balance of expansion and containment is the core tension in his formula. Outward light equals expansion. Inward electricity equals containment. If an individual only expands, they dissipate into nothingness. If they only contain, they collapse under their own gravity. The awareness loop requires both forces to operate simultaneously. It is a dynamic equilibrium. The use of element 118 as the ultimate metaphor for this balance is compelling despite its radioactive fragility. It requires monumental, almost unimaginable energy to fuse calcium-488 and californium-249 just to glimpse Oganesson for a fraction of a millisecond. Perhaps the metaphor holds up because true psychological integration, that perfect balance of opposing forces, is equally rare and difficult to sustain.
That is a profound way to interpret it. The synthesis of Oganesson requires pushing matter to its absolute limit, forcing particles together in a particle accelerator until they briefly form a new, unified whole. In psychological terms, integrating our opposing natures, our light and our shadow, requires confronting intense internal friction. The result is a brief, stabilized state of profound awareness. Bandel suggests that chaos and opposing tensions are not destructive forces, but necessary conditions for evolution. The Oganesson womb is the crucible where these opposing forces hold together long enough to birth a new state of consciousness.
This synthesis of particle physics and esoteric philosophy forces us to reconsider how we visualize our own internal architecture. Whether we view the awareness loop as a literal pathway of magnetic flux or as a powerful metaphor for psychological balance, the demand remains the same. We must integrate our expanding light with our containing energy to move freely across the various layers of our experience. Send this episode to someone who appreciates the intersection of quantum physics and philosophy.